A sudden scream left her mouth as she put her palms on her mouth. Jungkook looked up at her when he noticed her, again with no expressions, nothing in him. Everything is over, Vine, he murmured. I can't take it anymore. She saw him taking one of the broken pieces of glass in his hand and put it on his wrist to slit it. No, she ran to him immediately and held his hand with full force. Although she wasn't able to take the glass from his hand, she stopped his hand. He snatched it away from her in an instant and was about to cut his wrist. But then she held his hand again. Please. Tears fell out of her eyes as she shouted. He took a moment to look at her, his hand still held by hers. I don't get you at all, he stated calmly. Wasting your time and efforts on useless things. Be free now, Vine. He smiled and pushed her away as he ran the glass against her wrist with full force. Vine screamed in pain as soon as he did that. When he slowly looked down, it turned out his hand was completely fine and covered with her hand, which was bleeding crazily. His eyes widened when he saw this. His heart stopped beating for some seconds, but then gained back control soon. Thankfully, she was smart enough to place her palm above his wrist instead of placing her wrist. But he slid it very forcefully because he didn't want to have a chance back again at life. That's why her palm was bleeding too much and she was unable to breathe properly. He quickly tore apart his shirt and placed it on her palm, applying pressure on it to stop her bleeding. While having tears in his eyes, he shouted out aloud for his servants to call a doctor. He quickly picked her up in his arms and laid her down on the bed while staying with her for the whole time, having tears in his eyes. Why do you keep doing this? Just leave me alone. Leave me alone. He sobbed loudly. She put her other hand on his jaw and smiled. How could I, when I know you're suffering? I hate you, he shouted. Do you think this will make me love you? You're wrong, Vine. I hate you for everything you do for me, because I don't deserve any of this. You deserve everything, Jungkook, she whispered, but he didn't hear it, as the doctor entered the room and Jungkook looked at him. Thank God, doctor. Please look at her. Her hand is completely cut off, and she wouldn't stop bleeding. The doctor immediately came to them, took her hand from him. He started treating her, while Jungkook waited in the room, his patience growing up on him each passing second. After almost half an hour, the doctor was done treating her hand, and she was fainted with her palm full of stitches. The doctor said that most probably it will leave a scar for life, and after prescribing some medicines, he went away. Jungkook bowed to him and sat down beside Vine again, taking her hand in his until she woke up. After an hour, her eyes fluttered as she started gaining senses. Jungkook noticed it and looked at her. Vine, are you okay? She looked left and right for a few seconds and then looked at her hand in his. I'm fine. After a long time, I'm completely fine. Tears fell from his eyes as he kept whispering, I'm really sorry, Vine. I don't know what to say. She looked at him and said, Can I ask you for a favor? He nodded. Anything. She looked at her hand. As for returning the favor, can you tell me why you were doing that? I deserve to know after all of this, don't you think? Jungkook took her hand in his and kissed it gently as he held it without telling everything to her. 2 months ago, I was sick, so my personal doctor was treating me. But Dad, he controlled his anger in front of her. He turned out to be a traitor who gave me dosages of drugs every 3 hours. And until I find out, he looked at his bare hand, which was shivering. Turns out I'm addicted. He scoffed. There was silence for some moments as she looked at him, and he looked at her shivering hand. Then suddenly her hand came upon his and held it softly yet firmly. He looked above at her and found her smiling. Did you take them when I was painted? He shook his head immediately. Of course no. I'm not even as bad as you think. She smiled widely. Thank God. That means there's still hope for you. The hope which was clearly visible in her eyes. The hope which he gave up a long time ago. He shook his head and looked down. No, I have tried everything I could. Everything that you could think of. I tried it. But I'm tired now. I want rest, he said, and immediately a finger was placed on his lips by hers. Just trust me, she said softly, completely confident in what she was saying. At least once in your life, try to trust me. You said you tried every method. Let's try just one more. Her voice was soft and reassuring, but he couldn't help but feel annoyed at her persistence. He had been beaten down by life and his own mistakes, and he didn't know if he could find the strength to keep trying. Vine was determined, though. She had seen the pain in his eyes and the hopelessness in his actions, and she knew she had to do something to help him. She had faith in him, in their love, and in their future together. Jungkook looked into her eyes, searching for the answer he couldn't find within himself. Her gaze was unwavering, and in that moment, he decided to put her faith in her. Okay, he said grudgingly, one more try. Not because I want to live, but because I want to trust you. Thank you so much. She squeezed his hand gently, and there onwards, she became his therapy, his medication, his meditation, his pleasure to seek whenever he once struck. There were times when he wanted to give up, but she gave him hope, another reason to live, another reason to not get addicted. This was all he needed anyway, something that he could use against drugs, something that was bigger than drugs for him, something that gave him more pleasures to him, that he would forget about them. He took therapy sessions, trained with her for his mind to be calm against the triggers, and took some medicines as well prescribed by his therapist. 2 weeks later, Jungkook was standing in the shower, completely naked, with Wine at his side. He was shivering, but she kept whispering words of encouragement in his ears. It's okay. It will pass. Look how far you have come. You did so good. I am so proud of you. She came close to him and cupped his face in her hands. Look at me. He slowed down and looked above at him. In the cold of the shower, in the heat of the moment, they stared at each other. I'm so proud of you. I love you, Jungkook. I love you. And I will keep doing it if you get past through this. He stared in her eyes, and without knowing, his heart rate and shivers slowed down a bit as he asked her, You promise? Of course, it's a promise. He nodded. Then I will do anything and everything. This isn't bigger than your love, Wine. Yes, it's not bigger than us, Jungkook. Nothing is. No one can break us apart. Jungkook. Right. This mere addiction is nothing in front of us. That's how it's been for the past 2 weeks. They talk and talk and talk. She stays with him patiently, and he overcomes it with all his might. He has recovered so much, considering that he felt the need for the drugs after 2 days altogether. They suffered a lot in those 2 weeks, but finally they overcame it. Although there's still a long way further waiting for them, but they're ready to conquer it all. They kept talking like this, and before they knew it, Jungkook had stopped shivering completely. Wang noticed it first and cut off the talk. Jungkook, you did it again. Look at yourself. You're completely fine. She widened her mouth and smiled as she said, Jungkook looked at his bare body and the fists that he had clenched for so long. He rested them finally. He himself didn't believe he did it yet again. He looked above at her in sheer excitement and hugged her really tightly. I did it again. We did it again. Thank you so much, Wine. He spoke, and before he knew it, she was under the shower as well, getting wet with him. He broke the hug, and they looked at each other for a few seconds before locking their lips in a tentative kiss. Their kiss deepened, their hands moving over each other's bodies, expressing the emotions that they couldn't find words for. They were lost at the moment in each other as they stood under the cold shower. As they separated, their eyes met, both wearing a mixture of relief, love, and gratitude. Vine smiled gently. It was all worth it, wasn't it? Jungkook nodded, wiping tears from his eyes. It was, he whispered. But we're not done yet, are we? Vine shook her head, knowing that there was still a long road ahead. No, we're not, but we will get through this. He smiled and nodded to her as he hugged her again. For now, in the safety of their embrace, they found solace and strength. The future was uncertain, but they had each other, and that was all that mattered. With every passing day, they would face the challenges head on, and together, they would overcome them. And then they stepped out of the shower, hand in hand, their love stronger than ever.